morning and welcome to our presentation on disability retirement paperwork process. My name is Don Minear and I wanted to make sure you are all able to listen and to this webinar presentation. We appreciate you signing in today. If you have any questions, we hope you'll hold those until the end, and we'll be able to actually review each of the questions and make sure your questions are answered before the day is completed. If you're in the presentation today in person, please step up to the microphone, or we'll restate your question from the microphone so everybody in the webinar would be able to listen to the question as well. For your reference, we will email this presentation to you today, so you'll have it as a backup copy to review the processes we'll be going through. Today's objectives, we have many set up for our presentation. The first one is the overview of the disability retirement types. Conduct a walkthrough with the current PSPRS disability retirement spreadsheet, which we'll be going into in more detail. And we want to review the retirement forms, changes, and the required documents that you'll be able to submit to our office to help somebody get through this disability process. And we want to answer any questions regarding this as far as the process is concerned. To give you an overview today, we've got many, after stating the objectives, the overview is going to be what can you do with the spreadsheet in terms of completing a member's retirement paperwork. There's different types, like a normal disability, survivor, death, deferred, annuity, beneficiary designation, tax forms. There's various types of retirement paperwork you can do with the PSPRS spreadsheet that we're going to show you how to locate in just a minute. The one we want to focus on today is B, the disability retirement. When you're finished today, you should be able to print out the exact forms to send to PSPRS that help the member through this retirement process. You'll be able to save the Excel spreadsheet for your files and records going forward on your local drive. What you'll need before we get started, obviously, is the current PSPRS retirement spreadsheet, as we just talked about, which is available on the website. You'll need the member's file in front of you, and you'll need the retirement instruction manual for your reference, which is also available on the website as well. What I wanted to do is give you an overview, and we'll be going back to this slide later in the presentation. But if you were to look at the application process, it takes you through various steps. The first step, as you can see, the member gives notice to the local board, you, the employer, of an incident that has happened in their lives to apply for disability benefit. So you can see on step one, that's how the process starts. Now if you follow the green boxes as we go through today, to step number 2, the local board will send this member application for disability form, which is a form P5-EE, and we'll get into this in a little more detail. You, the employer, would send this to the member to fill out. So if you go to step 3 now, the member would submit this application with the relevant medical documentation to the local board. Step 4, the local board secretary would ensure the application is complete and may request records from the physicians that they may put on the application. And then step 5, the application is presented to the local board to determine whether the independent medical examination needs to be ordered. You then take that into consideration. Now we're going to go through the green boxes first and come back to the exceptions later. So if you go to 5A, it would be the local board deems there is sufficient medical evidence presented to order an independent medical examination to be conducted. The local board would send a letter and various forms of the medical information, job description, and to the medical board, the doctor, and the local board then sends a letter to the member. So this is a normal process that you would go through for anyone who makes application for disability. Step number 6. The member or the local board would schedule the appointment for the independent medical examiner. In this case, the individual would be able to then have that appointment and get the input from the doctor. Step 7, the medical board, we're calling it also a doctor, completes the IME report. The Form P5-LB, which we'll show you in just a few minutes, the questionnaire, and submits all the documentation back to the local board. Now it's imperative you get all this back, because then on step number 8, the local board would then need to meet to review the report and take action to approve or deny the application based off the medical board report or the doctor's report. Now, if this is approved on step 8A, if it's approved, the local board secretary completes all the paperwork and forms that are contained within this spreadsheet we're going to show you in just a minute. Now, if all of that has been completed on step number 9, we would go to where the local board secretary would submit all the retirement paperwork to PSPRS via certified mail by the 10th of each month. That way you would ensure all the paperwork's in one packet as it comes to public safety. Number 10, PSPRS reviews the package and concurs with it on 10B. If PSPRS concurs with the local board, the package is then processed and disability benefit is approved. And then step number 11, as you can see, PSPRS begins payment of the disability benefit. That's the ideal situation for a particular disability application that would be processed. Now what I'd like to do now is go back for just a minute and go back to step number 5. If we go to step number 5 and see that the application is presented and you need to decide now whether an independent medical examination needs to be done, an IME in this case, and you go to 5B, you say the local board deems there's insufficient evidence for this particular individual, then he may not meet the requirements, the disability benefit, he didn't have a doctor's listed, whatever it might be. You'd go to the step right below that, the red step, under 5B. If the member does not produce sufficient medical evidence, for example, the application is denied. The local board sends a letter to the member and notates his decision in the minutes, and then they send the packet to PSPRS, and that's the end of the discussion. But if he does deem that there may be additional information that's needed, you go from 5B to I. The member may request additional time to provide additional medical evidence, and then the decision could be postponed and tabled at a local board meeting. Then you'd start back with the process with number 3 again, submitting all the paperwork to go through this process. So as you can see, if the member doesn't provide everything, you do have some choices as a local board. What I'd like to do now is go down to step number 8 again, where the local board meets to review all the reports, everything's come in to make the application. If it's not approved, it may be denied by the board, so you'd go to 8B. If it's denied by the local board, you'd send a letter to the member and the original application and notation to the minutes by certified mail. You may deny it at that point. But PSPRS always likes to review all this, so if you go up to the step right above it, if PSPRS may disagree with your decision, it may initiate a rehearing process, and the board would then need to review the medical evidence again, and then you'd go back to step number 8. But if not, if PSPRS agrees with the local board, the decision is final and the benefit is denied. So we do like to review all applications that do come into our office. There is one other point I'd like to make. If you go down to step number 10, if PSPRS is reviewing the application, we may look at it and say, well, maybe there is not sufficient documentation presented for our board to review it, or our local office here. Then it may go from step number 10, as we review the packet as it comes in, it could go back to number C. As you can see, if the member disagrees with the local board, if PSPRS, we disagree with what you've decided, we may initiate a rehearing process, and the local board will be required to review the information again. Then you'd go back to step number 8. So the idea here is there's various venues in which a person could make the application and is completed back to our office for review, for a rehearing, or we accept what's been presented to us so far. So we just wanted to make sure you see that it's somewhat of a process for an application, and it doesn't happen overnight like a normal retirement. Now, if you have any questions about this slide, we will be returning to it later in the presentation, but at this point I would like to take you to the next step. I'd like to review for just a moment all of the forms and documentations that are required. What I've done in this presentation today, you can see there's asterisk forms that are provided by the spreadsheet that we're going to get into in just a minute. There's a P5EE, that's for the employee to fill out. There's a P5LB, filled out by the local board. And there's various types of LBA, O, C, depending on the application of the disability. There's a Form 8, which is optional, a Form 11D, a P12, a Form 13. As you can see, the tax forms. All of those forms can be created from the spreadsheet, and we encourage all local boards to fill that out. In addition to that, we would need minutes from the local board, as we talked about, reviewing the application and approving it for payment. Medical reports and documentation supporting the award of the disability as well, from the IME, not the doctors that are presented when he presents his first case to you. You can keep that information on a local board level. But we do like to see a copy of the IME that the doctor sent in that you made your decision off of. So with that said, all of these forms and documentations are required as you go through a particular application process for a disability. Also, on the forms and documentations, we do need to see a copy of the member's birth certificate. If he's married, a copy of the marriage certificate, the spouse's birth certificate, eligible children and birth certificates. Perhaps there may be a divorce during the period of time of his service. We'd want to see a copy of the divorce decree or a certified copy of the plan of the domestic relation order. Also, we'd need to see any medical documentation for a disabled child if it's applicable. So you can see there's a lot that goes into a particular disability retirement. And we want to make sure you understand all this paperwork needs to come to our office at PSPRS in one package so we can review it to move forward. Now, I'd like to spend just a few minutes for right now and go through what I would call the disability retirement types. As you can see, I've listed 4 different types. An ordinary disability is defined as a non-job related physical condition which totally and permanently prevents the applicant from performing a reasonable range of duties within his or her department, or a non-job related mental condition which totally and permanently prevents the applicant from engaging in any substantial gainful employment or activity. So, and the one thing you just need to remember on an ordinary disability is non-job related. Now I'd like to talk about what is job related, the other 3 types of disabilities. We're going to focus today on the accidental disability, and that's a job-related physical or mental condition which totally and permanently prevents an applicant from performing his reasonable range of duties within his or her job classification. That's what most of the disabilities might be at, where a person is injured on the job. But there might be a situation where a person may be injured on the job and you may make application for a temporary disability. That's also job-related, very similar to an accidental, but you may think this individual would recover, so you'd only grant this disability for a 12-month period because you think the person may recover from whatever injury he sustained on the job. Or the last type is the catastrophic. It's job-related, physical and not psychological condition that is not an accidental disability which totally prevents this person from engaging in gainful employment. That must be a very serious accident that happened on the job, something that would prevent him from ever coming back to work. He may be somewhat incapacitated if you ever granted a catastrophic disability. But if it's not that serious, you'd go back to the accidental one. So I just wanted to kind of give you a flavor of the types of disabilities the law provides for any employee going forward to make sure they have options if they were hurt on the job or non-job related. Because today's presentation is going to focus on the accidental disability, let's take a few minutes and talk a little bit about that. How do you help the member when he comes in and makes application? He says, I got hurt on the job, I need some help. You can go to PSPRS website, click on Public Safety, and the top of the page. Once you've clicked there, it will take you to a subsequent page for getting the spreadsheets. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's an employer section under Spreadsheets. You would then scroll down, click on that spreadsheet. If you were to do that, this would open up for you. It would call the retirement forms. These retirement forms is contained within a spreadsheet, which would then pop up on your computer, and you can right-click this and save your file if you'd like to also. Once you've obtained this tool that we provided for all the local boards to prepare this retirement spreadsheet, you would see opportunity to walk through the process of what happens. Now let's take a look at what happens when the spreadsheet comes up. This is the first thing that you're going to see is an input section for you in section number 1. You would obviously need to know some information, personal information, spouse information, other contact information for that employee. That's why you would need to have his file in front of you as you're preparing this spreadsheet. Now, because we provided this for you, we wanted to walk you through the spreadsheet if you've never had this opportunity before. The first thing you'd need to know is, obviously, you'd have to select accidental disability. Do you see the number 1 on the right-hand side? It's not a normal retirement. It's not an ordinary. It's not catastrophic. It's not temporary or survivor, the ones we just talked about, but it is an accidental disability, number 1. The next thing, after you've clicked on that, you would then go over to and fill out number 2, today's date, January 11th, 2012. Then you'd want to make sure you've got the actual number 3, the retirement date. After you put in the retirement date of January 31st, 2012, you would need to know, obviously, the date of the disability. Perhaps it happened at the end of last year. You'd put in that date. Whenever the person came to you and said, I need to make application, this is the job-related incident, this is what we're going to do. Enter the member's disability date. Once you've completed step number 4, you'd obviously need to know step number 5, his name and personal information. As you can see, we're putting in John Michael Smith with his Social Security number. He's male, and we put in his birthday of January 1st, 1960. Now, do you think Mr. Smith was actually set up to be married? I believe we do. He has a wife. His wife's name is Sally. You'd fill in Sally Mae Smith with her birth date and also her Social Security number and the date of marriage. That would be the next step on the input sheet of filling out the input sheet so we can get the desired forms for this person to actually retire. After step number 6, you'd put in step number 7. Do you know where this employee actually lives? You'd need his current address and phone numbers, home numbers, cell phone numbers, and his email address. Now again, this is the input sheet that we're going to show you in just a minute how it fills out on the forms. Once you've got all the pertinent information in for this particular individual, you would then continue to make sure if he had any children. You need to decide if there's any eligible children based on age and disability. If you had one individual, in this case, the member has no dependents, you check box number 1. You'd enter the drop-down information. If it was number 2, for any dependent children, perhaps his son's name was John Smith Jr., and his date of birth, and he wasn't disabled. He also had another child, Jane Smith. So you'd fill this in the input section, as you can see, determine for those individual children who are dependents of the person that was disabled. And if you scroll down, you can see step number 4. That's the retiree employment section. Who did this individual work for? This is your local board. We particularly put in this example Phoenix Fire Department, and he served from this date to this date in the local board name. This is where you would put in your information as a local board secretary of who your employer is in terms of who this employee worked for. Also in the input section, you would need to know in section 3 of this input form, you would need to know his compensation. So let's take just a moment and fill that in. This individual had a high 3-year average that was calculated from January 1st, 2009 to December 31st, 2011. In this example, he made $75,000 one year, $80,000 the next, $85,000 the next year. This really should come from your payroll records, but we also encourage you to look at our local board portal calculator, which is also located on the website, to double check your information and reconcile that your payroll records match what we have for the high 3 years. After you filled that information in on step number 2 on the compensation area, we would need you to fill out the final contribution. As of December 31st, this particular person had a contribution to us of $123.45. So you'd put that information in, and then you'd select, is this salary from another employer? No, or yes from that particular drop-down box under step number 2. Now, as you can see, this age of the member is 52. He's got 17 years of service. So he worked 17 years. He had an accidental disability, a job-related disability. Perhaps something happened to him on the job. That's why you're filling out this input sheet. So we'd like to take you to the next step and show you that if a member had no leave without pay, you check the box number 3. If the member had leave without pay, you'd fill in box number 4. You'd have one pay period in which a 2-week period he wasn't able to work. And then the spreadsheet would then calculate all of the information you need based off the decimals, the fractions, the credited service. It would all then calculate exactly how many years of credited service. In this example, you can see he had 17 years of service, but he had one particular missing pay period for a 2-week period, which reduced his credited service to 17.047. You can all see that from the demonstration today. Now, what I'd like to do is take you through this example a little further. If a member had no prior service, you'd check the box, and as we said in number 6. If the member had prior service, you'd enter that information in. Perhaps he worked 2 years down at Casa Grande Fire Department and then got hired on to the Phoenix Fire Department. Then you'd put that information in. The spreadsheet calculates the prior service, and if there's nothing else that needs to be calculated, again you can see that he's 52 years old, 17 years with the particular current employer, 2 years prior, plus a minus 0.3, he had 19 years of credited service. So we just wanted to give you an example of what may vary from employee to employee, but all of this information needs to be put in. And again, if there's none, you just check the box none and you could move forward. If he was always working for your department, that's all you'd need to put in. So on the input section, we also like to see in section 4, we're going to call this the industrial leave if there was any. Payment information, direct deposit, perhaps we encourage each employer to always put in this information so the person can automatically get a direct deposit to his checking or savings account. To do that, if there's no industrial leave, you check the box. If you left it none, you do the same. It wouldn't apply. If the member had any industrial leave, then you'd want to put that information in step number 2. Now let's go through the select the payment period, because you always like to see if he did have any or if he didn't. We'd like to know who to make the check out to and the type of payment. We always encourage the direct deposit. In this situation, you'd put in Superbank or wherever the bank may be. You'd put in the bank's phone number, and this information comes from the member's account information, the routing number, the bank ABA number, and the bank account number. We always encourage you to do this because then, when you're all done, you can print the forms for the member and have an automatic direct deposit, as we'd mentioned. So be sure to fill in all the input information, and it makes the spreadsheet fills in all the tabs you can see below. Now the disability retirement forms, as you can see, there's going to be various forms we'd like to step you through at this point. Now if there was any beneficiary information you need to know also for Section 5. The beneficiary type would be maybe a primary individual. It perhaps is his wife, Sally Smith, that we talked about before. She'd be the primary individual, and she'd have the same address and information as the member because they still live together. So you can click the button and it would bring the information over. You'd want to put in maybe a secondary information as far as a beneficiary, Jane Smith, one of the children, and the information for Social Security and date of birth. And also, if you check same as member, it would fill the information in step number 3, as you can see. And same with John Smith Jr. So we always encourage, that if there's a child is there and maybe he's living in a different address, you could put the new address in for that person. This would automatically fill out the beneficiary form later on, and you'd have all the information needed to help this person retire. Now also in the input form there's this section 6 that we wanted to explain to you, that these forms are prepared by. We need to know who actually put this together. This is where you could put in the preparer's name, Joe board member, which is hopefully your name, whatever your name might be, your phone number, and your board meeting date, and this would be filled out right towards the end of the application process we just referred to, of when you actually met to approve this disability, because that gives us all the information we need here at Public Safety to review the process from the flow chart we referred to earlier. So let's talk a little bit about completing the package, the whole retirement process package. This is just the input sheet that we put in, but this is the types of information you'll get out from the tabs below. As you complete that, after you've completed all the information on the input sheet, all the various forms we have listed there, the P5, the Form 8, the beneficiary, the tax forms, all of that information will then be sent to our office. And you can click on the tabs below on the bottom of the spreadsheet to get that information and review it. As you're completing the package, you'll also need to have the documentation from the member. Again, we talked about the certificates, if there's eligible children, any divorce information, all the disabled children, dependent information, and of course if there's a direct deposit, as we just filled in for Superbank, you want a copy of the voided check for the member from the member's financial institution that will have the bank routing number and the ABA number, so we can give the person a direct deposit. And we always like to have a copy of the member's driver's license if possible, just to verify that that is the employee that we're working with as we process the paperwork. Now also the local board will need to complete the following information as well. The P5 local board for disability in the spreadsheet. You'll make copies for the local board independent medical examiner, so that person or doctor can complete that information, sign all the forms, all the minutes from the local board are approving the retirement benefit, and the medical reports from the IME. And again, we just want to review the fact that all this needs to be in a package at one time, sent together, certified mail to our office, and please have it here by the 10th of the month. Again, we're reviewing this process to make sure you can see that you can have the package together and mailed here. This employee will get their benefit if it's here by the 10th. So let's look at these individual forms we've been referring to. We've done all the input, we've done all the hard work. Now let's look at the forms which needs to actually be filled out at this point. The forms are determined by each type of retirement of the one that you selected. In this case, we particularly selected the accidental disability. It may be completed based off the input tab that we just referred to. Some of the forms may require only one signature and date. Some may require multiple signatures, but they do have to be printed off for the member to complete, because we need an authorized signature that this is really what's happening. And some may need to be completed by the local board. It's somewhat confusing, so I'd like to take you through the process of which ones are processed by the member and which ones need to be signed by the local board. Let's say, in this example, it's to be completed by the local board. He does not need to print and submit all of the forms, but this tab will give you the information of the different forms that need to be done. So we've selected accidental disability. You've completed all this by the local board. You don't need to print all of this off, but it will be printed off in individual forms in just a minute. The local board does need to fill out all the information we just talked about with the name and address and information we've asked to be provided, but it does not need to be printed or submitted to PSPRS. The input sheet does not need to be sent to us. We want to make sure the forms that you see there where it says print, and we'll be able to print those forms off. Now, this is to be completed by the local board, but does not need to be printed or submitted. This is just a worksheet. If you click on that, the form will print when you click on worksheet. So it kind of gives you the service dates, and so you can see the calculation of how we came up with the 19.047 years with the prior service or with the leave without pay. This is for your reference so you understand how the calculation came up with the credited service. Now, this is to be completed by the member, the form P5-EE. As you fill out this form, you can print it out off the input sheet, and it will show you that his name will appear, his social security, his address, all the information you've just recently put in. This is page 1. But as you can see, this has to be completed by the member as well. You can see all the red highlighted sections do need to be completed. Information such as who the doctors might be, and the information who you need to contact if you have any additional questions. So this is an example of the P5-EE. Now, I want to make sure you understand this form is new as of January 2012, and this new form does need to be accompanied with all disability paperwork. This needs to be completed by the local board, the P5-EE for the employer. This gives you an example where the red sections are completed by the member. He's authorizing you to complete the following information and signing off on a waiver of confidentiality. And you do need his signature and date so you can discuss this and send the information to our office. But the green section, or the yellow section, the yellow highlighted section needs to be completed by the local board. You can see where you would need to sign as a local board representative, and down at the bottom you'll be able to see where it needs to be authorized by you, the local board, as well. So this gives you an idea of who needs to sign where or initial to complete the paperwork. Now, if you've done the input sheet, a lot of this information will come across, but this form does need to be completed, page 2. Now, this also needs to be completed by the local board. This is the P5LB. As you can see, it has the employer name and his name at the top from the input sheet, but there's additional information that is required. You need to complete the yellow highlighted section of this sheet in order for this individual to qualify for a particular disability. Very important, without this form, we cannot authorize any payment to a member. You can see there's various places you can say does not qualify. This is where he qualifies for an actual accidental, ordinary, temporary, or catastrophic. But each one of those needs to be checked for the particular application that has been made and a date in which it would be effective. So you can see that the board chairman or secretary usually needs to sign a signature and print the name so we can know exactly what day the board meeting and the motion was made, so our office can complete and review the paperwork as we discussed in the flow chart. Now, this needs to be completed by the local board. We'll call it the doctor or medical board. As you can see, this is Public Safety's new form, LBA. Now we want to make sure you understand this is an accidental disability questionnaire for this particular member. You will be able to see that this is new information that our office is requiring for any disability application. To be completed, the yellow section by the local board and the blue section would be completed by the medical board or the doctor. So you can see the top section, yes or no, did he qualify, and there's a series of 11 questions we'd like to see answered by the local board. Now you really can't answer those questions until perhaps you've got the information back from the doctor. So in addition to that, the IME report, you can see the doctor would answer those 7 questions in addition to his report and sign that and send it back to you. So you might need to send this to the doctor before answering questions 1 through 11, and then he could fill his information out and you could attach it to your information so you'd have a complete package. But our office would like to see that the doctor sign the form, and we'd like to see that the local board sign the form authorizing based off what the doctor had mentioned in his report. Now this is for each local board, as you can see, for an accidental disability questionnaire. If you were to choose a different type of disability, as we talked about, a temporary or ordinary, you would see a different form in front of you based off the spreadsheet because it has different questions for you to answer. So we just wanted to clarify that for an accidental disability, this does need to be submitted to our office. Now the P8 is obviously done by the member because he's authorizing for us to have beneficiary information. Hopefully we put everything in the input sheet and you can see where it needs to be signed by the member. The local board may act as a witness if you'd like, the local board secretary, but it cannot be one of the named beneficiaries that are said on the form that are listed. It can't be Sally, Jane, or John in this situation. We'd like to see a different witness authorizing that the member would like to have these as beneficiaries. Now this particular form is the Form 8, and as we said, it's the beneficiary designation form. Let's take a look at one of the other forms that we may need to look at. This is to be completed by the local board. This form, P11D for disability, is from the input sheet. You'll be able to see that you complete this entire form, and this all comes over from the spreadsheet. As you can see, it recognizes that he had 19 years of service. His last contribution is listed there. The last pay period is listed there. The compensation comes from what you've already calculated, and this particular person would receive the $3,300 benefit as mentioned here. And the surviving spouse is also. Now you can see that it's been prepared by Joe board member, and down at the bottom in the yellow section you would need to put the date in which it was all completed. The next form is the form we need to have back in the office, which is the P12, and to be completed by the member and the local board. This is giving us authorization to make the payment. Without this form properly documented, we cannot make authorization of payment to a particular member who was hurt in the line of duty. So you can see that the yellow would be signed by the board chairman or designated secretary. The member would sign the red sections, and then you may witness it if you'd like to authorize that this is actually what's supposed to happen. Again, without these signatures, we're not authorized by public safety to make a payment. So it's important before you send in the packet to review all the documents and make sure all the signatures and dates are listed. What I'd like to do now is move on to the next form. This is to be completed by the member. It's a W4P form. This is where you would come over from the input tab. You can see it's a federal withholding form, and regardless of the member's benefit, may be taxable or may be non-taxable. But usually if it's an accidental disability, it's a non-taxable event for this particular individual. The top section is optional, but as you can see on line 1, it says check here if you want to make sure no taxes are taken out, down at the bottom. If he does want some taxes taken out, then you'd put in the various if he's single, and the number of exemptions, and also the signature and date would need to be made. But normally on an accidental disability, we want to remind you that you would check box number 1 that says, I do not want any taxes taken out on an accidental disability. Now let's look at the state withholding form. This is to be completed by the member. As you can see, this prints out from the information that we put in before, his name and address, everything fills it out. But again, regardless whether the benefit is taxable or not, this form still needs to be completed. In this particular case, you may want to withhold a percentage, but again, if it's an accidental disability, we always encourage you to put box number 2, I do not want any taxes withheld from my pension on a state level. Now without this form, we really don't know what to do, so we always encourage you to fill out the state and the federal form. This is to be completed by the member as well. This is the Form 13 we talked about earlier on the Input tab. It'll only appear if you elect to have direct deposit. You would see that a super bank is going to get the deposit from our office. The routing number and the account number is listed there, and you're attaching a copy of a voided check and a copy of his driver's license. But we do need this form signed by the member and dated as well, which you can see in the red highlighted area. So this is to help us start the direct deposit on the first month his benefit is paid. Now you may have some questions at this point from the presentation, but we wanted to make sure that everyone has a chance to, if you're on a remote location and through the webinar, feel free to type in your questions and we'll display them here and answer your questions accordingly. Now, if you're in the office here at the presentation, we'd feel free to ask the questions. We'll restate the questions so everybody at the webinar would be able to hear the answers as well. So what I'd like to do is go back for just a minute to that flow chart. Can we do that? Pardon? Just go forward? Okay, there it is. The flow chart that we talked about earlier in the application process. Hopefully this makes more sense to you. The steps 1 through 11 through the green boxes will get the person the actual benefit paid to him based off the board's recommendation. But there are the exceptions to the rule where we may ask for a rehearing or we may ask for various documentation that we didn't see presented through the entire package being completed. So I wanted to open this up for just a minute and see if there's any additional questions from anybody from the webinar group that we could answer at this point. I believe you can type in your questions now and we'll be able to display them. The first question we have that's been submitted from the webinar is, how soon is the local board contacted in reference to the approved status of the disability claim for PSPRS? We'll let Robert answer that question if he would.
Sure. How the process works with respect to a disability determination by the local board is it goes through kind of a couple level review here. First, the benefit manager would review the entire packet to ensure that all the necessary documentation is in place, and then from there it would go to our legal counsel, both our paralegal as well as our assistant attorney general will review the determination that was made by the local board before we proceed with making payments. So as long as it is received by the 10th of the month, which is the requirement for all disability packets, it's usually within that 1 week, maybe 2 week time frame before a decision is made. However, you do, just like as a member, we at the system do have up to 60 days to request a rehearing for any disability application. So we usually, if there's no real major issue and we concur with the decision of the local board, we would just proceed with the payment in that particular month. And usually what would happen is our paralegal would probably contact the local board secretary, or the benefits manager would contact the local board secretary either via phone call, via email, just to let them know that, we're proceeding with the payment. If there is any actual question on the approval, then that's when you would get your actual certified letter, or you would receive an actual letter from the system officially requesting rehearing. And that process, like again, the member, we have up to 60 days to request that rehearing process. So usually we would try to give you guys a heads up beforehand just to anticipate that, but there's really no cut and dry, within 10 days of receiving the packet we will have an answer for you. So it's kind of, it just depends. So I would really recommend that if you have an application that you feel is in question, or potentially could be in question, just make sure that you contact either the benefits manager, Bonnie, or our paralegal, Michelle, and they can kind of give you a status update on that packet.
Okay, thank you, Robert. We'd like to turn it now to question number 2. Will the webinar be available to us to refer to in the future? The answer to that is yes. We've recorded this webinar, and it will be posted on the website. You'll see it under the local board training, under the webinar sections that will be recorded. And we'll be doing this throughout the year on various topics, so we encourage you to sign up for the other webinars as we go forward. So the answer to that is yes. Feel free to review this, and we will email this packet that we just gone through to you at the end of the webinar session today. Question number 3, should the local board wait until there's a final determination from PSPRS to send a letter out to the employee indicating his or her status? Robert, would you like to field that question?
Sure.
That's right.
Well, I think that's kind of a process that the local board can set up. I mean, if the local board would like to initiate any sort of template to notify the member initially that there's been an initial decision made by the local board, whether it's approval or denial, and then obviously if it's a denial, providing them with all of their rehearing rights and what steps they need to do to rehear it. If it's an approval, you could send an initial letter if that's the process for the local board. Send an initial letter to the member saying that the benefit's been approved. However, this benefit still has to be reviewed by the local board at the local board, or at the administrative office level. And should there be any requests for rehearings at the administrative office level, then we as local board would contact you at a specific date. If there is no question with respect to the application process and the PSPRS administrative office does concur with the decision, you will receive your benefit payment, on the last business day of the month in which your retirement is effective. So I think it's just kind of how the local board sets up their policies and procedures.
Okay, question number 4. We do have a good question here. Under what circumstances can the local board seek a second IME, and can the local board request a third IME? That's a very good question, because you have to make all of your determination from the local board side based off the IME which is presented to the local board. Now, if the member has submitted his application, as we talked about before, the board secretary says we need to take this individual and make the application to an IME state, which is step number 5 and step number 6, then I think at that point you better choose your first IME. You want to make sure you pick the right doctor the first time. Now, if the IME comes back and is in conflict of that particular medical evidence of what the original doctor said, his doctors, then yes, you can go after a second IME if you need to get another opinion. But you have to make your determination as a local board based off the medical evidence. Now, again, we need to remind you that the local board pays for all the doctor's expenses for the independent medical exam. If you have deep pockets and you want to continue for a third IME, you could do that as well. But usually after the first IME and the original paperwork that the members presented, you should be able to make a determination. But there has been occasion where we've seen a second or a possible third IME. Every doctor is going to have a different opinion, but you want to choose the doctor well on the first IME for that particular injury which he or she may have.
Don, just to kind of piggyback on that particular point, if you as a local board would like to reference for public safety 38-859 Section C, it kind of talks a little bit about the local board resolving conflicts in medical evidence. And within that, you as a local board do have the due responsibility to resolve those conflicts in medical evidence. And if you so decide to do so, you could employ additional physicians or medical officers to help in resolving those conflicts. So yes, the local board does have that vested responsibility, and it's also within statutes for your review.
Okay, do we have another question? Okay, well, those are all excellent questions. This has been a wonderful presentation today. We've been able to reach out to many local boards who are signed in through the webinar. We'd now like to take any questions from those who are attending here in the office. Do we have any questions from the group here today? I would say that's a negative, so we can move on in our presentation. So we just wanted to go back and thank you all for coming to our presentation today about the disability application process. We zeroed in on the accidental disability, but you can see it's the same process if you chose an ordinary, a temporary, or catastrophic. We reviewed each of those types of disabilities. You can see the paperwork is very easy to fill out once you fill out the spreadsheet. Once the input sheet is completed, you'll be able to print all the forms available to you, and we encourage you to make sure all documentation is signed, sealed, and delivered before you send to our office. If there's no further questions at this time, I'm just checking to see there's no other questions came in. We appreciate your attendance today, and thank you for attending our presentation on disability retirement paperwork process, and hopefully this has been a good hour spent together. Thank you very much for coming today.
So in summary, I'd just like to follow up by from Don's presentation. He did a wonderful job in explaining all the different documents and forms that both the member and the local board need to complete. But I'd like to take a moment to kind of talk about at what point each form and document would be completed. If you refer back to the flow chart, as you can see, there's kind of a whole process that the local board goes through in terms of first determining the eligibility based upon the application that's been submitted, and then if the benefit is approved, then the entire retirement packet is to be sent to our administrative offices for processing. So what I'd like to kind of talk about is, as you complete the forms and the spreadsheets, you may have to save a copy of that spreadsheet on your own personal folder, personal drive, and refer back to it as this application goes through the determination process. So the first thing you want to refer to is the application, which is the P5EE that both the member and the local board has to complete. Obviously, that would be the first initial document that is completed, because that is the application that the member is seeking a determination on. So you would complete that, ensure that that document is completed, and provide that to the member for signature so that he can provide the application along with his medical documentation to the local board for initial determination. Once the determination process has been completed, member has gone through IME if the local board has deemed that, and the member has been approved for the disability, then that's when you would refer back to your spreadsheet that hopefully you have saved on your personal drive, wherever you have on your computer. You can bring back that document back up, and then you can complete the rest of the forms, indicating, service, indicating compensation, to get all the rest of your documents, your beneficiary forms, your tax documents, the calculation, the P11D, which is the calculation for the benefit. Then that's when you would complete that second section of documents to be submitted in its final packet to the administrative office. So I just wanted to kind of briefly talk a little bit about that, in that you don't have to complete all the forms right at the get-go, but just note that the spreadsheet is going to be that resource to actually have all the forms completed. I would also like to kind of talk a little bit more about the actual questionnaire, because that is a new section within the disability packet that the administrative office is completing or requiring from our local boards. So as you refer to that questionnaire, you'll notice, as Dawn had mentioned, that there are two sections, a section that's completed by the local board and a section that's completed by the doctor. That when the doctor completes that section, obviously this is in addition to the report or any reports that you would require from the doctor to summarize this applicant's eligibility for the benefits based upon statutory requirements. The main reason we created this document is to kind of help our local boards kind of understand what are the requirements and eligibility for any type of benefit. Specifically, we were highlighting the accidental. So those questions are based upon statutory requirements for a person to be eligible for an accidental disability. So as you complete and look at those questions, don't feel as a local board that you must answer each and every question, question 1 before you move to question 2 before you move to question 3. Just note that when you submit the application to the administrative offices, all those questions should be completed and answered throughout the entire process. So when you as a local board decide which question can be answered at which point, whether it's at the beginning process when you're reviewing the initial application, or as Don had also mentioned, maybe some of these questions cannot be answered until the IME has been completed, and then the local board can go back and address the other questions that are associated to the questionnaire, then you can do so. It's solely up to you as a local board on when those questions are answered. But do know that the questionnaire does need to be completed in its entirety before you submit it to the administrative offices for review. So again, we'd like to thank you for your participation, and have a great day.